joining in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I will let Farai introduce herself, but this is a slide talking about who she is and what she does. And we've had Farai before on the VMEs last year talking about, I think it was more of a general conversation about herbs. So that's recorded. You can go back and watch that if you would like. But today we're talking about dandelions. So Farai, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. My dog Duke is all of a sudden really interested in what I have to say after being quiet all day. So if you hear a dog whines or claws on the floor or chickens, just try to tune it out. I apologize. I'm gonna try share my screen here with my PowerPoint. It has been a while since I've had to do anything like this. Share screen. You're muted, Morgan, so I can't hear you.
I just made you the co-host.
Mute. Share screen. Okay. Which one is it?
We probably should have run through this instead of chatting.
You know what? I think everyone is having grace for people right now with the pandemic, or at least that's what I'm trying to have. Or recovering from everything. Share screen. One participant can share at a time. Okay.
Well, I stopped sharing, so you should be able to. Yeah, I'm just gonna make you the host.
Yeah, that'll probably be easier.
There you go.
Apologies, everyone, and I'm grateful for patience. Share screen. Let's see. Share. Okay, let me do it. I might just send you the.
Yep, you can do that.
That way. That way it's not too dramatic. In the chat.
Thanks, Ashlyn.
Oh. This is the first class that I have taught in on Zoom in a year because I've just purposely not been teaching. So clearly you can see I am out of practice. Can you message me on Zoom, Morgan, so that I can chat you?
Yep.
I see it. There we go.
All right. Can you make me the host again, Farai? And then we're good to go, people. So close.
And where do I do that at?
Find my picture and then click the three dots and then do make host.
Make host.
Woo. All right, here we go. Nope, we don't want more.
All right. I think we're good. Oh.
Sorry. Okay, there we go. Can you see your slides?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Excellent. We're ripping and we're rolling here. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the amazing plant backyard friend that is dandelion. Next slide, please. A little bit about myself. My name is Farai Harreld. I live on unceded Kaw and Osage land in so-called Kansas. I am a writer and a folk herbalist, and I have been using backyard plants, oh my goodness, I want to say 6 years, but I've been an herbalist for about 10 years. So I think before I got the courage, it's been more than 6 years, at least maybe 8. But I've been, I think before I got adventurous and venturing outside to go forage and wildcraft and things like that, I was buying my herbs in the store. So I was buying dandelion root and dandelion greens in the store before I got the courage to go outside and figure those things out for myself. So yeah, I've been a folk herbalist for roughly about 10-ish years, and then I've been foraging for about 6 to 8 years. And then how long I've been, oh no, I answered that question. Next slide. All right, so why engage with backyard plants like dandelion? For me, the main reason was that even though I'm half Kansan, I was not born here. I was born on the other side of the world. And one of the ways that my father was American, he moved to Zimbabwe. And one of the ways in which he became acquainted with the flora and the fauna of Zimbabwe and Botswana, the countries that I grew up in, was going outside, learning the names of the trees, of the animals, of the plants. And he passed that down to me. So after I moved here, I was I had a lot of like culture shock, but once I felt comfortable enough to be outside and start exploring, I turned to nature. That was like my first thing, was learning the flora and the fauna that lived around me. And I live in Topeka, and so I live in the city, and it just looked like walking in my neighborhood, looking at what was coming out of the sidewalk cracks. It was typically dandelion, it was typically plantain, it was typically yellow sorrel, and just getting acquainted and doing that made me feel like I belonged. It gave me a sense of place, a sense of responsibility to where I'm living, to care for it and things like that. And then I became a parent, and I wanted that same thing for my child. I wanted them to become a steward of the earth. I wanted them to, care about the planet and care about not littering, caring about, the places that they occupied. And so for me, a lot of that was just in connecting with nature, and just teaching that you don't have to live in the country to be a part of the environment that you live in. And so foraging and identifying was just one of those things that I did in order to connect. All right, so again, we're talking about dandelion today. And if you are so inclined to start foraging or even getting it from your backyard, depending on where you live, or if you live in the country, avoid places that have high foot traffic and vehicle traffic. Avoid where pets urinate and defecate. Avoid areas that have pesticide or herbicide use. Make sure you know exactly what you're harvesting. I'm pretty sure everyone knows what dandelion looks like. It's such a popular plant that this may not apply. But if you are unsure, we're going to talk about what the plant looks like. And that goes to anything that you're deciding to pick up and use for culinary or medicinal purposes. Just make sure you're picking up what it is that you think that it is. One of the ways that you can do that is join local groups, ask experts. There's so many amazing local groups to Kansas and Missouri that are on social media, Facebook, and for anything from plants to mushrooms. And then also your master gardeners will also help in whatever county you live in. They'll help you identify something. If you are unsure, you can take a plant into them and they will walk you through identifying it, or sometimes they can even do that on the phone. And then I will be talking about some of the medicinal properties of these plants. I am not a doctor, I'm not a physician, I'm just a wee folk herbalist. I do not do consults. I definitely empower people. I want to empower you to do your own research. If you're interested in ingesting any of the herbs that I talk about for medicinal purposes, it is your responsibility to do your due diligence and research, find out about any drug interactions with any pharmaceuticals that you're taking, and just to use your own discretion, speak to your care providers and things like that. Next slide. All right, let's hop right into dandelion. So the Latin name of the plant is Tarasacum officinale of the family Asteraceae. I probably said those wrong. I'm sorry if there are any botanists in the crowd, but that's how I've been saying it for years. It's often how it's not necessary, but it's helpful sometimes to learn the Latin names of plants, especially for herbalists, because then you know that if this plant is in this family, then it probably has these herbal actions, but it's not necessary for the everyday person. But the Asteraceae family is also known as the daisy or the aster sunflower family. The name dandelion comes from the French sentence dente de lion, translated to lion's teeth, because of the jagged edges of the leaves resembles lion's teeth. Like if you take a look in that picture right there, you can see the kind of jagged edges look like the teeth of a lion. And that's a helpful identification tool when you're out and you are trying to identify dandelion. And sometimes there are not a lot of lookalikes. Any of the lookalikes that look like dandelion are much larger. In Kansas, I don't know if it's the same in Missouri, so they wouldn't look, you'd be able to tell like, yeah, this is not a dandelion. But looking at the leaves is an excellent way. Now, dandelion is not at risk for over harvesting or anything like that. It is prolific around the world, in the Americas, in Southern Africa, Europe, India, Australia, New Zealand. And I love all the folk names of dandelion because it usually tells you about the names that people called plants is usually is an indicator of like the ways in which they use plants, the lore surrounding the plants, or even some of its medicinal uses. So lion's tooth, piss of bed, which comes from Europe, and it's because it speaks to the action that dandelion has as a diuretic. It makes you pee a lot, essentially. And so swine snout, white endive, priest's crown, puffball, wild endive, Irish daisy. My dog is whining, I'm sorry. He's probably bunnies, he's seeing bunnies outside. Monk's head, which is going means daisy, which is going, yellow going. And yeah, many names, but those ones are my favorite. Dandelion is a perennial plant, like I said, with no sustainability issues. And you know from the puffball seed heads that it has no problem with pollinating and dispersing its seeds. And so yeah, it's everywhere. I love seeing dandelion. It's covering my neighborhood. It is, and it's hilarious because it used to be everywhere in my backyard, and now there's zero because I have chickens that are free range now and they've ate all of it. But dandelion is often treated like a weed and sprayed with toxic herbicides. And this is bad because it wrecks our ecosystems. It decimates populations of pollinators, and it's so bad for your soil health. A lot of gardeners don't like dandelion in their garden beds, but I don't mind it because it's a perfect excuse for me to, and first off, I know that it's in my garden bed, and then I can just harvest it for medicine then and there. And I've kept it, and it's away because it's gated, it's away from my dogs. And it aerates the soil. Like we're going to talk about the roots and what their roots look like. So I don't mind it in my garden. I just pick it up like a weed and take it inside. But so many people, especially in America, hate dandelion, and it's one of those plants that the most commercially used herbicides are used to eradicate dandelions from lawns, because typically in America, people prefer the uniform suburban green lawn, and those pretty yellow blossoms ruin that. And so this elimination that we have on dandelion is so bad for our health. It's bad for pollinators' health. It's bad for soil health. And so I'm on the high horse of leave dandelions alone. I spread that gospel, and I encourage you all to do the same. Next slide. All right, so let's get into the identification of dandelion. It is not composed of one yellow bloom, but if you take it and look closely, it sits on a caper like a little bud, and then that bud opens up, and then there's tons, like hundreds of tiny little florets. So it's made up of lots of tiny little flowers. And each of those flowers, has their own like little reproductive system. And so the flower head sits on a single stem, and then at the base of that stem are the basal set of toothed leaves. So the leaves don't go up the stem. The leaves are only at the base of the plant, then the stem, and then you get your florets. Now, underneath the ground, dandelion's thick taproot is brown on the outside, and it can grow anywhere from 10 to 12 inches underground. So the taproot is very, very long. And then at the crown, if the plant gets a chance to get old, the root crown, it has several heads. And then the root itself on the inside, so underneath that brown skin that it has a white flesh, and that white flesh is milky. And it's because of this plant latex that the plant has. And that is just a natural reaction to the plant that the plant has from being bruised or broken. And that's how it protects itself, because that latex, that milky stuff that the plant secretes, it's bitter. It's bitter tasting. So the plant has that in the hope that it would deter insects and then, foragers like us. But that bitter taste is actually really good for us as human beings, which is why dandelion has been used for so long. Next. Now, in terms of dandelion as food, all parts of this plant are used to make teas, tinctures, infused oils, and we eat the greens in salads. We put them in soups, we eat them in stir fries, and there's so many other preparations. And I'll share some of the examples of preparations later on. Now, in terms of what parts of the plant that we eat the buds. Oftentimes so this is the buds that haven't bloomed yet. So when it's like a tiny little round knob kind of, we eat those. Typically they're pickled like how you would pickle cucumbers, carrots. And then the dandelion blooms obviously before they've gone to seed into that white puffball, so the yellow florets. And then we eat the leaves for their bitter and rejuvenating taste. And then the roots are typically used for tea and medicine. And then in terms of taste, right? Like, what does dandelion taste like? If you've never really foraged before, dandelion is like the perfect intro into doing foraging or eating something from your backyard. And backyard weeds as food are interesting because it's not typically what you get in the grocery store unless you live in a culture that has a more refined palate, right? Like in the West, we tend to prefer really salty and really sweet foods and textures. We don't like a lot of bitter. We don't like a lot of interesting tastes. Some people do, but not everyone. I'm just talking about like the commercial, everyday, standard American diet. We tend to avoid bitter foods. And dandelion is the perfect introduction to that because the root taste is bitter and it's slightly sweet because of that high starch content that it has. And then the leaf is bitter and a little bit salty because of its high mineral content. So it's one of those greens that's perfect in salads and soups and on its own because yes, it's giving you like the sultry mineraliness that you're used to from eating greens, but it also has a little bit of bitterness, which we will talk about and why that's really good for you. Okay, next slide. So now, when we're getting into harvesting times for dandelion, you can harvest it all throughout its lifespan, right? So it typically blooms in the spring and typically dies out in the fall, but you can also harvest it in the summer. But in the spring, the roots are typically more bitter. And then the greens are sweeter. So then people will usually harvest dandelion greens in the spring. If you go to a health food store right now, I know my local one will probably have dandelion greens on their aisle. And then when you move into the fall, The roots are much sweeter after the cold snap. So that's when you'll see a lot of herbalists and foragers out there harvesting the sweeter dandelion root. The roots are full of inulin, which is a prebiotic food, which is really good at nourishing the bacteria in our gut. So a lot of people tend to harvest the root in the fall and the greens in the spring. You can do it whenever. Just be prepared that probably in the fall and along in the summer, the greens are going to be a little more bitter than they would be in the spring. But I harvest it all year round whenever I want, if I can get to them before my chickens do. Now, I've been talking a lot about the bitter taste, and bitter taste plays an important role in our bodies. Eating bitter foods stimulates secretion of bile and stomach acid, which is important for our digestion, and it's important in helping support our liver as it does its job of detoxification. And one of the reasons why dandelion is such a popular food, especially in the spring, for all of its beneficial liver support and all that stuff, is because in the wintertime, our digestion is much more slower because we've been eating a lot of root vegetables and meats and kind of heavier meals to sustain ourselves during the colder weather. This is, like now with industrialization, that may not be true, but a lot of people that follow seasonal eating like our ancestors did, right? In the winter, they're eating out of their stores, and in their stores, it was usually potatoes and pumpkins and other squashes and stored meats and canned goods. And so it was like really heavy, full, rich meals that our body does a lot of work to digest. So when the spring comes, these beautiful, nutritive, rejuvenating plants like dandelion were reintroduced into the diet when they became available, because they helped support our body in getting back on track. And so I just love that. I love looking outside and being like, oh my goodness, dandelion is here. It's time to start incorporating more greens now that they're available and things like that. And then in terms of harvesting dandelion, that long taproot that can get anywhere from 10 to 12 inches is it breaks very easily. This is another reason why dandelion is hated, which, I don't like to use that word, but it's true. It's because that root snaps very easily. And then if you just go to yank the plant out, the root is for sure going to break, and then another plant is going to sprout from that root. So if you're wanting to fully take out a dandelion plant out of where it is, you need a root tool. You need something long enough to go down and get that entire plant up. And that's what works great, because with dandelion is one of those plants that, you want access. You want to use the leaves, you want to use the roots, so just go out there, dig, and it's so pliable and easy to get out if you have the right tool. And that way you're getting all of the root as well. So next slide. Oh, dandelion lore. Oh man, I've been talking fast. Is everyone doing okay? Does anyone have any questions? I can't see. We can probably pause for any questions.
I'm keeping an eye on the chat too, Farai. So if anything comes through in there, I'll let you know.
Okay. All right. Now the part about the lore I could not fit into a slide, so I'm just gonna read my notes here. But as for folklore, humans all over the world have been using dandelions as tools of divination and celebration. In the springtime, people would wear crowns of braided dandelion flowers to mark celebrations, the spring equinox, things like that. But there's so many rituals that I've heard that humans around the world, not heard, but read and researched that humans around the world have been doing with dandelion. And I thought it would be fun to share some of them. But supposedly, if you blow a seed head, the number of seeds remaining are the number of children that you will have. That was like a tool of divination that people used to use back in the day. If you wanted to know how long you will live, blow the seeds off the head of a flower, a dandelion flower, and you will live as many years are there on the seeds left behind. That one was scary because what if you blow too hard and then you're only left with a couple little white spindles? But that was another tool of divination. And also, I feel like this one applies less to us in modern times with, the invention of allopathic medicine. So we're better off, we're safer there. And then to tell the time, blow 3 times at the seed head, and the number of seed heads left is the hour that it is. I haven't tried that one yet, but it's fun. To send a message to a loved one, blow a seed head in their direction and visualize it. In this book called Magical Herbs, the author Scott Cunningham recommends the use of dandelion roots in tea to aid in prophetic dreaming. So all of this lore comes from all over the world, not just Europe. Like I said, dandelion is prolific around the world. And so a lot of people use this plant in different ways, culinary and magical. And then dandelion is associated with growth and transformation, as a few dandelion flowers soon turn into hundreds of seeds waiting to travel around. And then my personal favorite story about dandelion is that if a child goes outside and looks for the tallest dandelion stalk that they can find in the early spring, the length of the stem will be equal to how much taller the child will grow in the coming year. So those are just like fun little activities and lore that you can share with the children, to get to children or anyone interested in just to introduce magic into magic and wonder into working with backyard plants. It doesn't always have to be scientific, in my opinion. All right, next slide. I feel like we're missing a slide. Is there one on dandelion medicine? Dandelion is food. Go to the next one. Next. All right. Next. Oh, I'm missing an entire slide, but hold on.
I'm gonna go back to where you were.
Yeah, go back to where you were, and then I'm going to talk about the herbal actions of dandelion. I don't know where that one would have gone. Bear with me, folks.
Go forward and see if it's. No.
Okay, I have it in my notes, so I'll just talk about it. Okay, so we're going to talk about dandelion and its medicinal properties. And I'd like to remind y'all of the disclaimer that I gave earlier about using your own discretion, especially if you're on pharmaceuticals and you are concerned about interactions. So if you heard me talk earlier about plant latex, that's present in dandelion. If you have a latex allergy, then working with dandelion may not be for you. I have it's in the aster family, and some people have allergic reactions to plants in the aster family. So some people are unable to work with dandelion. One of the ways that you can test that is grab your dandelion root, and then when you see the milky sap, just dot it on your skin and then watch that dot where the latex has been for an hour. And if you have a serious reaction, then yeah, you're probably not going to be able to work with dandelion. But if you are unbothered, you're unbothered. I'm completely unbothered with using dandelion, and I love eating it. I love using it as medicine. It's such a safe and gentle and friendly plant. And the medicinal actions that dandelion has on the body, number one, diuretic. So it makes you urinate. And then it's a cholagogue. So it helps promote bile production, which we talked about earlier, and why humans use it post-winter to help with sluggish digestion. It's a bitter, and that bitter action also plays a role in digestion. And that's really important for folks who are struggling with issues of digestion or low liver, low bile production, things like that. It's a tonic, meaning that it's an overall just really good supportive herb for the body. It's a hepatic, so it's a liver tonic. It's restorative. So again, those actions of helping restore balance to the body, especially after a sluggish time like the winter. It's a mild laxative, so it's super gentle. And if the laxative properties are something that your body needs, then that's the action that dandelion will typically have on your body. But if that's not the action that your body doesn't need, then the plant probably won't have that effect. Duke, sorry, y'all, my dog. And then it is also a nutritive, meaning that it's nutritious. It's full of vitamins, it's full of minerals. And then the ways in which people typically prepare dandelion for medicinal use is number one, as an edible, so including it in your diet. Number two, as a vinegar, so infusing the plant itself into a vinegar and then using the vinegar on its own, or making an infusion, which is called an oxymel. So that's basically just vinegar and honey. So infused vinegar and honey. And then as a tea, and I'm going to share a recipe about that in a little bit. As a decoction, so a decoction is just a long steeped tea in heat, where it's basically like making a reduction. And so that will make like a thicker, darker tea. And that's usually done with the root of the plant. And then next is with a salve and an oil. A lot of people use the oil to make a salve. And those dandelion salve also has some pain relieving properties. And then again, like the parts that we use to make medicine are the leaf, the flower, and the root. All right. Now back into, you want to go back to the slide right after lore? Right. There we go. So those websites up there, the Grow, Forage, Cook, Ferment, that website has about over 50, like a resource that has about over 50 dandelion recipes on there. So just go on that website and type dandelion in the search bar, and you will have access to so many simple and fun recipes for dandelion. And then I also love the website Gather Victoria, because it has some really good dandelion recipes too. And so some of the ways in which human beings use dandelion to make mead, to make beer, to make kombucha, to make chai, tea as well. And then in foods, pancakes, cookies, breads, muffins, jelly, vinegar, pesto, capers. And then for bodily applications, soap, salves, lotions. So honestly, you can use this plant in so many ways. Like I mentioned before, it's very gentle, and it's so easily accessible. Next slide. All right, so dandelion is has become really popular over the last few years as a coffee alternative for people that are trying to stay away from caffeine, but still really like the ritual, right? The ritual of making that beverage. So here I've included a recipe. Herbal Academy is a really accessible website that has information about the herbal actions of a lot of plants, as well as recipes. And so here's a recipe that teaches you how to make dandelion coffee. And there's chicory root in there as well, because that one, chicory root, is the one that typically gives people that coffee taste that they're looking for. And whereas the dandelion is going to give you a lot of the medicinal properties, but it's not going to give you that, I don't know what to describe coffee flavor as, umami. There's a little bit of bitterness, but there's something in there that people really, really love. So yeah, that recipe is right there. And then I love to make that. I also really love to make it with chai herbs. So your cinnamon, your star anise, There's so many chai blends that you can look up online. And then I just added chock full of dandelion root in there. And then you've got a nutritious herbal beverage. I bought dandelion coffee from Amazon for my brother for Christmas. He really liked it. Yeah, there's a brand called Ticino. There's a brand called Ticino that makes multiple coffee alternatives, and they have one that is mostly dandelion, and it is very popular. But you can make it at home, especially if you already have a lot of those warming culinary spices like chai and like cinnamon and allspice and cardamom, that you can make a delicious chai. And I do want to mention that with the root, you're using the dried root. So you harvest your plant, you bring it inside, you wash it off, and then you set it out to dry. If you have it in a dehydrator, you can dehydrate it until it's kind of brittle and snaps. Or you can just dry it in a plate on the counter like I do. All right. Okay, so what was the one about rubbing a dandelion onto your chin? I have not heard about that one, but if you know it, you please elaborate, because that sounds funny. I'd be hesitant to rub anything on my chin because sometimes, even if you're not allergic to a plant, you still have a little dermatological reaction sometimes, or at least I do, where I just get a little bit irritated.
It was something we did as kids, Farai, and I can't remember why. Like it was supposed to do, like tell you something, and I can't remember what that was.
Dang, I wish I had come across that in my research. But yeah, and then kids will also, because the stems are hollow, so kids will blow and try to make whistles out of the stems. It's just such a fun plant to play with in general. Even after the seed heads have, even with the plants, even after the puffball has like dissipated and it's just like the flat little drum top, my daughter would pick those up and she would pretend that the little drum tops were drums for fairies. So she'd gather them and then like put them around. It's such a fun plant for big kids and little kids, the big kids being me. All right, now dandelion syrup. This is delicious, and it is so this is so good on your pancakes or in your coffee or in your tea. And I'm hoping we can leave this up enough for people to take a picture. Again, you can just look up Herbal Academy dandelion flower syrup, and then this graphic should pop up on their website. But it's basically making an infused syrup that then you can use on pancakes. You can use as a sweetener of some sort. And you can do this with any flower. And spring flowers like violets and lilacs, dandelion, henbit, dead nettle. People do all kinds of things with spring flowers, but the dandelion one makes a pretty yellow color, and that's really fun, and it's really easy. The chin thing was buttercups where I grew up. See, there we go. That's another thing, is that regionally, the names that we have for certain plants and the ways in which we use them or interact with them changes from region to region, which is why it's really important to know exactly what you're harvesting, because I called something somewhere else, like in the South versus in the Midwest versus in the North. So yeah, that's something to pay attention to. Next slide, please. All right, so I feel like I have talked a lot about dandelion today. These are some of the other spring plants that are growing up and around dandelion in Kansas and Missouri. If you're not seeing them now, you will see them soon. But henbit is out right now, as is dead nettle, chickweed, prairie sage, not so much yet, echinacea, not so much yet. Cleavers, maybe a little bit. Well, actually, no, I've seen a lot of it. Violets are up and at 'em right now. Plantain is up and at it right now. Sorrel, mullein is up and at it right now. Bee balm, not so much yet. But these are all, yes, and nettles. Cannot forget nettles. But these are all delicious spring plants and greens that you can incorporate into your life and make recipes with. And then now in terms of resources, The Medicinal Wild Plants of the Prairie by Kelly Kinchner. This is an old book at this point in time, but it's really one of the only ones that I know that's region specific to this area that I love. And then the native, oh man, I'm gonna get it wrong because there's two different ones. The Native Great Plains Museum, it's in Wichita. Oh, to find out if you'll be rich, put a dandelion flower under your chin, and the degree of the glow on your chin will be the degree of your financial success. That is hilarious. I need a big glow then. But yeah, so the Native Great Plains.
Great Plains Nature Center.
There you go. There's
Yep.
a train museum and I always get them confused. They have guides, and those guides, they have guides for everything. But one of them is like wildflowers of Kansas. And I'm sure it might be relevant to Missouri as well. But I also really love those resources for just taking it out when you're going out to go identify. And then there's the Plant ID app and the Seek or Picture This app. I think I use the Seek app the most back when I was still figuring things out. And then any Kansas or Missouri native plant guides. And then if you really love to forage and you really love to cook, there's this book called Wild Remedies by Rosalie De La Forêt and Emily Han. And that book is organized by season. And it talks about the most commonly available wild plants and shares recipes for them. It's really specific to North America, in my opinion. It's perfect. It has lots of dandelion recipes in there, violet recipes, and then it moves on to more plants that would be readily available in the fall and the summer, and it has recipes for those. So that one's really fun. And then there are so many amazing foragers on TikTok and Instagram and social media if you use them. My personal favorite is Black Forager. That's her name. She has a very popular TikTok and Instagram page, and she's always sharing recipes. She shared a grape hyacinth lemonade recipe the other day, and I did not know that grape hyacinth, not all hyacinths are edible, but grape hyacinth is, and that is abundant in my neighborhood. So lots of fun, easily accessible things. And then I want to talk a little bit more about harvesting. If you go over to the next slide. If you haven't heard of Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer by now, definitely read that book. But she has this honorable harvest guideline in her book, and it's and it resonated with so many people, because even though foraging and harvesting and people connecting back to the land is really important, it's also really important to not get caught up in the excess. I remember when I was, thank you, Leslie. I remember when I was first wild foraging, I would see something and I'd recognize it and be like, oh, I know what this is, and now I need to get it. And then there were times when I would take more than I needed. And that's not a good attitude to have. You really need to be cognizant and present and look past your excitement and think about yourself as a part of the ecosystem that you're in. And so Robin Wall Kimmerer's book and her guidelines, Honorable Harvest, are really something that I try to incorporate into my life. And I encourage anyone who is interested in wild foraging to also take into account things like, only taking what you need, take only what is given. Obviously, if you are foraging from your own backyard and you don't want dandelion to take over your garden, go ahead and get it all out of there. But this is in terms of you maybe being in your neighborhood and there's dandelions there. Don't take all of them, because the bees and the other insects, they use that plant themselves. That's pollinator food. All right, next slide. Oh, and this is a little bit about me, where you can find me, my website, my social media handles. I have a Patreon where I teach simple folk herbal remedies myself. But yes, it is one of those first foods, yes, for pollinators. So if you're wild foraging or foraging in your neighborhood, don't take everything. It's a conversation that I'm forever having with my child, because once you see that first dandelion in the neighborhood, she's like ready to grab them all. So we have lots of conversations about how we're not the only ones who need these plants or want these plants or love these plants. Does anyone have any questions?
You can feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions, but this was awesome, Farai.
Thank you, and thank you for all of you for being patient through our technical difficulties and my first online Zoom class in a year.
Yeah, that was my bad. We hopped on early, and then Fry and I are friends in real life, so we were just chatting away and forgot to do a run through of her slides.
Exactly.
But
And I double checked my slides like 2 or 3 times before I got on the chat, and I probably accidentally deleted the medicinal one. And so I can post this, this on my website, or I can email it to y'all and y'all can share it with the participants. That way no one misses out on anything.
We also recorded it, Farai, so we'll share that too, so that people can watch again and catch some of the links and great resources that you shared as well. Thank you so much.
yeah. Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording unless anybody has any questions.
I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you for sharing this.
Thank you.
What is another backyard weed, so to speak, that maybe we don't know that we could be using? That's one of your favorites.
Plantain for sure. I use it for, first off, if you like kale chips, like if you've ever made kale chips in your oven, you can use plantain and make plantain chips in the spring before it gets really tough and stringy, and they are delicious with just like plain salt and olive oil in the oven. And it's also, it draws out like if you get bit by a bug, you make a spit poultice. Like if you get stung by a bee, make a spit poultice with the plantain, and then you stick it on wherever you got bit or stung. And I always keep it on hand. Like I dry it in the winter, and then I'll like put the plantain leaves in my freezer. And then if we get bit by a spider in the winter, not a brown recluse, but if we get bit by something, I'll put a plantain poultice. And yeah, that's just a plant that I love to have in my backyard at all times. And cleavers and nettle for sure. I eat plantain as a hike nibble. Tastes a bit like blue cheese. Yeah, I think the first time I ever ate it. Pardon, cleavers is a really yummy cleansing plant. It's one of those that it's called cleavers because it sticks to you, like it cleaves to you, because it's got those little tiny sticky hairs. And so making an infusion, so just just cleavers and water and letting it steep for 2 to 3 hours, and then drinking that is just a really good nutritive, supportive spring tonic.
Is that the one that's also called tick seed?
Tick seed is Biden's. That's what I know it as.
Okay.
Yes. And that one's a powerful antibiotic. So it's also really, really good to have in your garden. And people hate it because of the little stickers, but I had Biden's in my garden and I was very happy.
They have little yellow flowers, right?
Yes, I believe so. And you use the leaves, and I had like a really, really bad oral infection that I took like 3 rounds of antibiotics that I could not kick. And then I finally took some Biden's tincture. Yes, another name for cleavers is bed straw. But yeah, and then because it's so like springy and like perfect to put in a mattress, right? Back in the day. But then yeah, I love Biden's chickseed.